channel if you're new, or if you're not, I'm Alicia and I am so glad you're here either way. Today I want to talk about coping mechanisms, and to get right into it, I am sharing my somewhat unpopular and a little bit controversial opinion that food can be a healthy coping mechanism. What? So before we get to that juiciness, let's back it up and explore, why do we need to turn to food to cope emotionally? Well, the answer is actually in the question. Rewind. Why do we need to turn to food to cope emotionally? Turn to food to cope emotionally.
To cope emotionally.
If there is some kind of emotional pain or distress, sometimes we need something to help us cope. And in those times of suffering, we want something comforting, so a coping mechanism is there to provide some comfort and relieve some of the pain, or to bring some ease to a hard moment. A lot of people think, and this I think is enforced by our culture, that we're binge eating because we are out of control. We have no willpower. There's something wrong with us. But this just isn't true. Most of us are turning to food to get away from the discomfort of this present moment, and maybe that shows up as an actual binge, but not always. So what changes if we try to solve this problem by addressing the actual root cause here, which is discomfort in the present moment? Well, instead of turning immediately to judgment or self-criticism, thinking, there's something wrong with us, or thinking that it really has anything to do with food, because most often it doesn't, we could actually take a look at that discomfort, that emotional distress or pain. Before moving on, I want to be clear. When I say the binge isn't about the food, I'm not really talking about the binge eating cycle that can happen from dieting and restricting, which is very real. And I talked about it in my food freedom series last year, and I will link that relevant video below. So in that case, yes, sometimes physiologically we are binging because of restriction with food, but that's still not the root. The root is the emotional pain. The root is the lack of acceptance in myself and in the way that I am, and in thinking that I need to be some other way to be accepted or worthy or good enough. Now, there's a lot going on here, so let's try to stay on track. Woo! I get a little bit excited about talking about this stuff. So let's go back to the beginning of time. Or maybe not that far, but let's at least go back to the crux of what it means to be human. Now, in Eastern philosophy, in Buddhist psychology, and in most holistic approaches to life, it's acknowledged that all humans suffer, and nobody wants to suffer, right? Pain is unavoidable. It's a part of the human experience. And there's a saying though, pain is inevitable, suffering is optional. Pain is going to happen, whether it's something as major as, the loss of a loved one, or as minor as a toothache, or someone stepping on my toe. It's painful. Even if I become an enlightened, responsive being, at some point, I'm gonna get a toothache and it's gonna hurt. My suffering comes from how I respond to what is happening. If I resist, well, what we resist persists. If I resist, the pain is exacerbated into suffering. So if I accept what is, the pain remains just some amount of pain. Kristen Neff has an equation, actually. I think it's suffering equals pain times resistance. So pain is gonna happen to us no matter what. There's also a saying by the Buddhist activist and monk Thich Nhat Hanh, no mud, no lotus. So the idea is the lotus flower, and some of you might know it, it's this gorgeous flower that symbolizes renewal. And what makes it fascinating is that it only blooms when rooted in the mud beneath the water. The mud, it's disgusting and smelly and gross, but the flower sprouts toward the surface of the water, and when it blossoms above, it's beautiful. But without the mud, the lotus could not exist. Okay, so no mud, no lotus. This is a reminder that pain, obstacles, stuff we don't like, it's a part of life. The good and the bad are two sides of the same coin. We just couldn't have one without the other. And when the tough stuff comes, we don't need to just roll over and wait for it to pass. We can learn to take care of ourselves and acknowledge our pain and meet whatever need might be associated with the pain. So according to humanistic psychology, every negative emotion stems from an unmet need. So if I am feeling something uncomfortable, it doesn't mean that something is, wrong with the world necessarily, or that it even shouldn't be this way, but it might signal to me that there's a need I could meet. So maybe in moments of pain, I can be curious, what's happening now? Is there a need not being met? So now we can kind of fast forward again and come back to the focus of this video, which is coping mechanisms. So we have some pain. Let's use physical pain as an example. Someone steps on my foot or toe or whatever, and I might initially react compulsively. Maybe I yell at the person who did it, I scream ouch, or I get irritated or whatever. But at some point, I will probably also respond. So if my foot is really red and swollen, I notice there's an unmet need here. It needs to be tended to. So maybe I get a Band-Aid or a wrap if the skin is broken, or maybe I soak my foot in a tub of hot water, or I give it a massage or something to tend to the need, to cope with the pain and help manage the discomfort. You get the point, right? Now with emotional pain, it's no different really, except it is, of course, because we can't see it. It's not as obvious. And most of us don't learn the skills of emotional intelligence and learn how to know, what we're feeling, or name it or acknowledge it or communicate about it. So without those basic practices and language, it can be really hard. We just feel something uncomfortable and the primal instinct is get away from the pain. And then food is there and it's comforting and it's tasty and it is way better than this pain. So when we turn to food to cope, there's actually nothing going wrong here. This is natural. We don't need to judge ourselves for it. And at the same time, of course, binge eating and turning to food to cope compulsively does cause issues, and it's probably not an authentic choice. So let's break it down and get to my unpopular opinion. Turning to food is not necessarily the problem. It is the compulsive part, okay? It's reactive. And something that is compulsive or reactive is mindless. Have you ever noticed when binge eating that before you know it, the box or the bag of whatever you're eating, it's gone. Before you know it, your stomach is crying at you in pain. So most often we turn off during these compulsive binging moments. We're not present or aware of what's happening. To be aware, you have to be in the present moment. So if the very goal is to escape the present moment, we can't actually be aware. So what do? Remember what we said earlier, what we resist persists. So my suggestion and the way that I work with clients is to offer this. Notice what is happening fully as best you can. When the discomfort is there, notice it. Where is it in the body? What does it feel like? And what are the emotions tied to it? So sometimes just being willing to notice it and to be with it for a couple of minutes, it might dissipate on its own. A neuroscientist, Jill Bolt Taylor, I think, did a study actually and came up with this thing called the 90-second rule, where she found that most emotions will play out in the body within 90 seconds. So if you can spend a few minutes noticing, who knows, it might go away. Now, we don't watch it in order to make it go away. We've got to have no agenda other than tending to the pain, acknowledging the pain, not running away from it, right? Just willing to be here with it and see. Now, sometimes the pain is so great, we just can't stay with it, even for 90 seconds. We want to escape this moment. And maybe it feels like I want to rip out of my skin when I try to be with it. I just can't do it. Okay, so this is a moment when we need a way to cope with what is happening. So this is where your coping mechanisms come into play. So coping mechanisms are strategies or behaviors that help you deal with difficult or painful emotions or stressful situations. You might need different coping mechanisms in different contexts and at different times based on where you are or how you are or what's happening for you. So what I recommend is having a full list of possible coping mechanisms, and I've included a PDF download that you can get for free below with some ideas. So, taking a shower or bath, going for a walk, calling a friend, cuddling with a pet, getting under a weighted blanket, breathing techniques, getting into nature, listening to music, getting a massage, going for a drive, exercising, reading, writing. There are tons of ideas. And one of those on there is eating. But before we go to the food, stay with me for one more minute here. A list of stuff that you don't care about doesn't do you any good. So you don't want a random list. You have to make your own list of things that resonate with you, things that can actually provide you with some comfort and relief in a moment of distress. And you have to be discerning with when to use what, right? If I feel like I'm gonna have a panic attack, then going for a drive is probably not the coping mechanism I should turn to in this moment, right? So it's not gonna be a formula or a black and white checklist. I know, I love the black and white. This requires getting to know yourself. But as you know by now from my channel, this is such a huge part of this healing relationship with food work. But let's go back to the food now and to my unpopular opinion that food can be a healthy coping mechanism. And I don't mean healthy food can be a healthy coping mechanism. I mean food, whatever food, can be an option on your list of coping mechanisms and can be turned to in a skillful way. There are two caveats that I suggest though, and these need to be understood for food to be able to serve as an effective coping mechanism. So number one, it cannot be your only coping mechanism. If food is your default reactive coping mechanism, which is how it is for most of us at first, for me, a few years ago, I didn't have any coping mechanisms or know what that even meant. I didn't know how I felt. I didn't understand what was happening in myself, in my body, or when emotions arose. I ended up turning to food because it was there and I needed something now, and I wasn't present and didn't know what to do. So if food is going to be effective at helping you cope, first, it cannot be the only option. It needs to be used with discernment and intention. What does that really mean or look like? So here's an example. Let's say there's a food your mom used to make that brought you comfort as a kid. And now, you have a really rough day at work and you want some relief, and having a couple of mom's cookies or whatever would bring a sense of comfort, nostalgia, alleviation. Then yeah, this is actually turning to the food because you intentionally know it will bring some comfort beyond the distraction of eating. And even turning to food for the sensory enjoyment, in my opinion, is okay. The sensory experience of eating is one of the great experiences of life. I don't want you to not enjoy it. There might not be any history or nostalgia associated with food, but in the moment, maybe eating that food seems like it would bring some kind of comfort. This could be because we experience the world through our senses, sight, smell, touch, hearing, taste. So just as pain is experienced as sensations in the body, and even emotions, relief will be sensory too. But this leads to that second caveat. In order for food to be an effective coping mechanism, we must be present with it. If we are not present with it, we are mindless. And if we are turning to food to cope, we want the sensory experience of eating to actually provide the comfort, meaning we need to actually pay attention to the experience, noticing how it tastes, how it smells, how it feels to eat it, how good or comforting it is to notice it. If we can be mindful and notice, then we won't overeat because we stop when the objective comfort has been met before discomfort ensues by overeating. And then even if we find the food isn't providing the comfort that we thought, we are still present and have the mindfulness to be able to put it down and then turn to another coping mechanism that we need in the moment. So food can be a coping mechanism if it's not your only one and if you can be present with it. If you cannot, which right now, maybe on your journey, this just isn't possible, then yeah, it shouldn't be on your list of coping mechanisms. For a time, food was not an option for me to turn to skillfully, emotionally. But this all comes down to knowing yourself and your capacity and really acknowledging your pain and your needs. This work, it takes guts, it takes strength. It's a lot harder to be present and pay attention than to not, especially with discomfort. It's easier to turn away from the pain than to be with it. But if we turn away from it, then it buries. And because of that complexity of the mind-body connection, that emotional pain that we don't address, it's buried in the body and it manifests as illnesses and health conditions later on. So if we acknowledge and tend to our pain and care for ourselves emotionally, we will experience a lot less stress in life and greater health, not just mental and emotional health, but physical health too. So I hope you found this helpful in some way. I know it's a lot and it can seem more complicated than it should be, but it just shows how complex we are and our experiences. And that's really why this is a journey to healing. This is not an overnight transformation or, a checklist of tasks. It's really hard, but you can do it and you deserve to do it and to care for yourself in this way. If you enjoy this kind of content, I hope that you will subscribe and hit the bell so that you can be notified of upcoming videos. I will link similar videos like this in the description box, as well as my Food Freedom course if you're wanting a deeper dive into that for your own healing. And I also offer one-on-one coaching as well. All right, thank you for being here. I hope you have a great beginning of the year. I will see you Thursday with a brand new video. And remember, it's all a matter of mind over munch.